Let's talk about the shocking new documentary on Netflix called Unknown Number: The High School Catfish. Now, if you haven't watched the documentary yet, there are major spoilers ahead in this video, as well as trigger warnings for sensitive subjects ahead. So I thought that I would give my perspective as a trauma and psychopathology researcher as to what kinds of traits and behaviors may possibly be going on here. This is not meant to be a diagnostic tool or a diagnosis or even a discussion of full-fledged personality disorders. It is simply a discussion of traits and behaviors based on research and for educational purposes only. So the first cluster of traits that I want to discuss are probably the most obvious ones to me, but the less obvious ones discussed in the documentary. And these are the psychopathic and sadistic traits, the histrionic and attention-seeking traits and behaviors, as well as the narcissistic traits and behaviors that I noticed in the documentary. Now, if it hadn't been for the full context of all the real text messages that we saw that were verified by the FBI agent, and the fact that these text messages were vile, malicious, sadistic, explicit in terms of motivating self-harm in teenagers, as well as sexually explicit and predatory, because obviously these are minors that she's messaging, the public may have fallen more prey to her pity ploys, but I look at patterns of behaviors, and if I'm looking at the pattern of behavior here, as well as the content of the messages, I would definitely point to psychopathic and sadistic traits first. Again, this is not me saying that the mother is definitely like a full-fledged psychopath. I'm simply saying that in relation to her behavior, I can definitely see that there are some psychopathic traits and behaviors from the documentary. And this is exemplified in the way that the mother messages her daughter with very malicious content. She abuses her daughter emotionally, psychologically. She degrades her, she insults her, she mocks her very cruelly. She compares herself sexually to her underage daughter, which is very sexually abusive and predatory. She competes with her daughter as a kind of romantic partner, which is very strange for an adult woman. She competes for Owen's attention, which we'll get into regarding the histrionic traits as well. But she obviously is very pathologically and maliciously envious of her daughter. And this is very common among mothers, especially with psychopathic and or narcissistic traits, is that they will see their daughters as competition. And you can see that through the text messages when the mother is mocking the daughter for not being sexually mature enough to please Owen, her boyfriend. Studies also show a connection between cyberbullying and trolling and psychopathic traits. Psychopaths in cyberspace, under the guise of anonymity, they tend to be very cruel and sadistic, deliberately provoking others in order to gain that sort of sadistic pleasure at their reactions and their ability to manufacture chaos. That's why you have cyberbullies and trolls trying to bait people into conversations, trying to insult them, to aggravate them, especially out of envy and jealousy, and trying to taunt them to get that reaction so they feel superior to them, because they obviously feel inferior and they're lashing out and projecting. However, in this documentary, it turns out that the biggest troll for this daughter was her own mother, and that is the most disturbing aspect of it. So I would definitely say that psychopathic and sadistic traits are embodied here in the behaviors that we saw through the text messages. Now that to the histrionic traits and behaviors. Now, histrionic traits include a kind of pathological attention seeking at all costs. So the person in question may engage in a lot of provocative behaviors that draw attention to themselves, even if it means faking an illness, faking some sort of distress, wearing clothing, or being sexually provocative in inappropriate contexts. Again, this is not just about a woman, existing in her body or wearing a cute outfit. This is about women like narcissistic or psychopathic mothers who go out of their way to be sexually suggestive to their daughter's boyfriends, or making really inappropriate gestures or jokes towards minors, which this mother obviously did, not as a joke, but an actual threat. Like, she told her daughter, well, if you don't give him what he wants, I'm going to be doing it with him, or something of that nature. She said something like, I'll be doing this and this and with him. And she was very explicit about it. I won't go into the details because they're so graphic and it's very predatory and triggering to even discuss this and to hear about it. Watching the documentary was very overwhelming for many people. I heard a lot. I read a lot of comments on my page when I posted my article on this. So I know the reactions from the general public on this documentary, and many people were very triggered and overwhelmed. So we see that the mother's cousin, I believe, or maybe her best friend, I don't remember specifically, but cousin or her friend said that the mother was always very attention seeking, that she was always trying to draw attention to herself, very dramatic and theatrical, which is in alignment with histrionic traits. So I definitely believe that there is some histrionic, some sort of pathological traits and behaviors going on there. And then, of course, we have to get to the narcissistic behaviors. There is an element of grandiosity and self-centeredness and lack of empathy when you see the mother talking about how, like, well, everybody makes mistakes. And everybody makes mistakes. That Disney song came up in my head. But anyways, everybody makes mistakes. I'm sure you've broken the law, drunk driving, which is very odd considering all the bottles of alcohol on her counter. We'll get to that a little bit later. But obviously that's a false equivalency. I mean, drunk driving is a horrific act, but at the same time, this has nothing to do with her case, which is very specifically cyber stalking and bullying her own daughter, trying to get her to attempt suicide and self-harm, and really egregious, explicit texts that basically prey on her daughter and the daughter's boyfriend sexually and abuse them sexually through cyber bullying. And you can see that the mother is gently excited, and she's even smiling in the beginning of the documentary. She seems almost pleased with herself. And you can't tell me that there isn't some sort of rewarding aspect to the fact that you can't tell some aspect of her that felt rewarded by this behavior, because why else would she continue it? The lack of remorse, even though she does stage pity ploys, which psychopathic people often do in order to gain sympathy for their supposed traumas, which she also alleges she's had childhood trauma and an assault in her teenage years. And so that's very common, right? They try to stage these pity ploys to garner sympathy for their case. But because you see the full extent of the horrific messages sent to her daughter, and because she stalks Owen, the boyfriend, long after their relationship has ended, and proceeds to stalk his new girlfriend and her family, it shows that there may have been a deep infatuation or obsession and inappropriate fixation on Owen, especially given the sexual nature of the text, where she was competing with her daughter for Owen, a minor. And that is very predatory. And obviously there was something rewarding and malicious about the fact to her that she got to taunt her daughter, her perceived competition, in order to win over Owen or try to win over Owen. Again, very narcissistic, very psychopathic, very malicious, very sadistic, very trauma bonding, deliberate trauma bonding behavior, where the mother would deliberately try to get a trauma bond going in order to make the daughter dysfunctionally attached to her. And we can see that even in the letters from prison, where she tries to love bomb her daughter by saying, I miss you, and I didn't like the fact that you didn't say I love you. Basically, again, and a lot of people have pointed to this as possible borderline traits. I don't think she has borderline pathology, because people with borderline traits tend to harm themselves. They're not encouraging self-harm in others. Is there a fear of abandonment and she wants her daughter to be dependent on her? Sure. And a lot of manipulators resent the loss of control. So she wants control over her daughter. But the sadistic way that she spoke with her daughter, giving narcissistic and psychopathic traits.